Awesome. Well, it is good to see everybody. Spring is here. But I'm one step ahead of the game, and I got me a summer haircut, so I am ready to go for the summer. Here's the deal, guys. Every week we welcome our campuses, so we do that today, but we also welcome our Weekends on Wednesday service that... Oh, I thought you let me down tonight, but you did not let me down. Here's the deal. We're going to jump right in. We're in a series called Hero Maker, and the premise of this series is that there are all types of heroes in the world. Right? There are heroes that are men, there are heroes that are women, some are young, some are old. Some heroes exist in fantasy, like Captain Marvel, right? They exist in comic books, they exist in movies. Other heroes exist in real life, like Maria Rose Belding. Maria started a nonprofit that takes organizations who have extra food and she connects them with charities that give away food to the hungry. Highly effective. But regardless of what type of hero we're talking about, the word we most often associate with hero is the word power. And power is a big deal. That's why Uncle Ben warned Peter Parker that with great power comes great responsibility. Now, most of us, when we think of power, we think of Spider-Man or Batman or some superhero. Right, we think of celebrities, we think of politicians, we think of first responders. When we think of power, we think maybe of someone who signs our paycheck. But most of the time, we don't think of ourselves. And the premise of this series is that all of us have power. If you're a husband, you have power. If you're a wife, you have power. You have the power to create a happy environment in your home, a life-giving environment, a positive environment, or you have the power to just make it miserable, right? If you are a mom or a dad, you have power. You have the power to shape and mold your children and their self-image. You have the power to influence them to go down the right path in life or the wrong path in life. If you're in sales, you have power. You represent a company. You could do a lot of destruction with how you represent that company. If you're a volunteer, if you're a coach, if you work with kids in gymnastics. If you are a stay-at-home parent, you have power. If you're an employee, you have power. Your words, your actions, your demeanor can absolutely have impact for the good or bad in the workplace. So all of us have power, and it's likely that we all have power in multiple arenas of life. And what I hope you understand, and I hope it's been clear throughout this series, is that the power we have doesn't really belong to us, right? It's stewardship. It's been given to you, it's been given to me for just a brief amount of time. We won't have it forever. So if you're a parent, you don't have the power and control of your kids forever. Eventually, they're gonna do their own thing. If you are a teacher, you're not gonna have the kids in your classroom forever, right? So all of us have power, but the power we have is temporary, and so it's a stewardship issue. Now, as most of you know, Robert Kraft is the owner of the New England Patriots. And of course, right now his life is a mess, but 14 years ago, he was on top of the world. It was 2005, and the Patriots had won their third Super Bowl. And a few months after winning their third Super Bowl, Robert Kraft, along with some friends of his who were businessmen, they made a trip to Moscow. Okay, they made a trip to the Kremlin, and while they were in the Kremlin or at the Kremlin, they had the opportunity to meet Vladimir Putin. Now, they knew that Vladimir was a huge sports fan, and so some of the business guys that Kraft was with kind of encouraged him and said, hey, you got your Super Bowl ring, take it off, let him see it. Let him try it on. And so sure enough, he takes off his ring, and he lets Putin try it on. And he lets him kind of play with it and hold it for a little bit. Well, after a few moments, Kraft puts his hand back out to get the ring back. And according to the people in the room, at that point, Putin puts the ring in his pocket, 3 KGB guys come around him, and they walk out of the room. And he doesn't know what to do. I mean, it's a valuable ring, right? It's got 124 diamonds encrusted in it. It's very sentimental to him. His own name is engraved in it. So he wants to ask for it back, but he's kind of at a loss, so he waits till he gets back to the States to report what happened. Well, when he reports what happened, the U.S. State Department, they say to him, they say, in the interest of U.S.-Russia relations, we suggest you call it a gift and just let it be. And Kraft said, well, I'm not going to do that because it's not a gift. They said, let us repeat ourselves. In the interest of U.S.-Russia relations, we suggest you call it a gift. Putin's used to people walking in, giving him a gift. Maybe he thought it was a gift. So Kraft goes along with it. He just says, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Well, after a few years of kind of going along with the story, he just comes out and says, nope, I've been lying the whole time. This is not what happened. And then he tells the story of what happened. Now, I hesitate sharing this because I don't know if the KJB watches online on a regular basis. I don't know. But I can't imagine anything more arrogant than Putin putting that ring in his pocket, acting like it's a gift, especially when Kraft has his hand out. He acts like it's a gift. He acts like it was given to him. Maybe that he had a part of winning the Super Bowl himself, right? And then walks out of the room. But that is a great metaphor for all of us. It's very easy for us to look at our power and to look at our influence and convince ourselves, well, we're responsible for this. We're the ones who did this. And there's an element of truth in that. We certainly capitalize on the opportunities we have. And we certainly work hard to have what we have. But at the end of the day, for us, it actually is a gift, but it's a temporary gift. It's on loan to us from God. And the Apostle Paul confronts this attitude of us just thinking we're, self-made people. In one of the letters he writes in the first century, he asks this question: what do you have that God hasn't given you? And if everything you have is from God, why boast as though it were not a gift? So the power we have, it's a gift. It's on loan to us. It's temporary. The political power, the social power, the influence we have, right? The financial power, the birth order power, family power, organizational power, positional power. The power we have is a gift. It's on loan to us from God. And what I've been asking you to do throughout this series is to do your best to recognize the type of power you have in your life, and then to ask a very important question: how will I use my power? Most people, they use the power they have to protect their power and to elevate themselves. Right, to get ahead. They're the star of the show. Growing up, we had a driveway with a basketball court in it. And so as a kid, I would do, as many kids would do, I would be out in the driveway playing basketball and imagining in my mind that I was gonna shoot some last-minute shot, right? Like the stadium was gonna go wild. Nelson shoots, he scores, woo! And I was thinking about it this last week, that in all the times I stood outside playing basketball and creating these imaginary scenarios in my mind, never once did I ever picture 5, 4, Nelson gets the ball, 3, he dribbles the ball, 2, he's still dribbling, 1, he passes to a teammate, the teammate shoots and scores, the crowd goes wild. Never once did I ever imagine that scenario. It was always me making the final shot. It's always an option to be a hero in this world. We see it all the time. Another option is to use the power and influence we have to help others, to shine a spotlight on them, to elevate them, and to be a hero maker. And what's interesting is when we choose to be a hero maker, often it is a win-win. Often we become a hero in the process. So the last few weeks, we've been walking through the different character traits of a hero. We'll just review them very quickly. Number 1, we talked about this week 1. A hero maker looks for the good in others. They walk into a room, they walk into a home, and they say, I see in you potential. I see in you leadership. I see in you this character trait. Week 2, we talked about how a hero maker encourages others. And we said the test as to whether or not someone needs to be encouraged is whether or not they are breathing. If they're breathing, they need to be encouraged. Week 3, we said a hero maker invests in others. A hero maker invests their time and their energy into doing for one or doing for some what they wish they could do for everyone. Now today what we're gonna do is we're gonna spend the rest of the time we have together and we're gonna talk about another character trait of hero makers, and here it is. A hero maker sees in others what they do not see in themselves. Every single human being has value. Every single human being has immense worth. So about 250 years ago now, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, a couple of others, they sit down to write out this Declaration of Independence, and in the midst of their writing, they write this line: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident. In other words, if we would just pause, if someone would just stop long enough to really think about it, they should be able to figure this out, that all human beings are created equal. I mean, just stop, just pause long enough to think about it. It should be self-evident. But of course, our tendency is not to stop, our tendency is not to pause, and our tendency is not to think about it. Our tendency is to categorize people. It's to label people. It's to elevate ourselves above people who are not like us, which is why there's such an epidemic of insecurity in our world. This is why hero makers have to see in others what they don't see in themselves, because most people, when they look at themselves, they're blinded to their value, they're blinded to their significance, they're blinded to their potential as a result of what someone said to them years ago, or a result of what this group of people did to them decades ago. Recently, I was listening to the leader of a massive organization. He was talking about the counseling that he had to go through because of the amount of people in his life, just a large amount of people who had hurt him in a significant way. And he said, I noticed that because of the pain that I've experienced in my life, I'm taking out on my kids, my career is being affected, I'm taking out on my employees, my marriage is affected. And so he talks about how he went to week-long intensive therapy to deal with all this hurt he had gone through in his life. And he says, at the beginning of the week, his therapist handed him a notebook and said, all right, here's what I want you to do. I want you, in between our counseling sessions, you can do it maybe at night when you're just by yourself. He said, I want you throughout this week to write down the names of everybody who's hurt you in a significant way. I want you to work at filling up this notebook. And so we'll still do our sessions, but that's gonna be your big homework for the week. Well, he says at the end of the week, he says he walked in for his final session with this therapist, and he says, I was really embarrassed. He says, because I went to hand him this notebook that I thought was gonna be jam-packed, filled with names and filled with stories. He says, I didn't even fill up one page. He said, there were less than 10 names that I could think of people who had hurt me in a significant way. He said, the rest of the notebook was just blank. He says, and I started thinking how less than 10 people had gotten into my mind and gotten into my heart, and they were affecting how I saw myself and how I saw my, and how my leadership played itself out in my family and in my workplace and with my kids. And I think that's the experience of almost everybody, right? If we were really to write down the names of the people who've hurt us deeply, it's gonna be just a handful of people who've gotten into our minds, who've gotten into our hearts, but it's blinded us from seeing our potential and from seeing the good that we need to see in ourselves, which is why it's essential for us to really work at seeing in others what they don't see in themselves. Most people have allowed a few words and a few people to blind them from their value and worth. So 2,000 years ago when Jesus showed up on this planet, that is exactly what he did. He would see in others certain things that they were blinded to, and he'd call it out. And he made it his mission to elevate them. That's what Jesus did. He elevated the dignity of every single human being. Now, you may not believe this, and you may not agree with it, and you don't have to attend this church. But we do root all of our teachings in the ancient scriptures. And according to the ancient scriptures, the reason Jesus came to this planet was to reveal God to us. Prior to Jesus, everybody thought they had opinions about God and they had thoughts about God, but nobody really knew God. And the primary view of God, or the primary view of the gods, was that they were out to get you. That they were mad at you, that they were always on edge. And so every time someone would have a sickness, every time there'd be a difficulty, every time there'd be a bad harvest, and there was a drought, a famine, right? Every time someone had a severe challenge that they were confronted with, it was attributed to the idea that you were not doing something correct in your life. Something was wrong, something was off. God is out to get you. And since the gods didn't treat people well, nobody felt compelled to treat others well. And so when Jesus stepped into this world, people were 100% commodities. Slaves were commodities, women were commodities, children were commodities. And it's interesting because it doesn't even matter what category you're in, there were different levels even within their own category. So if you were a slave, there were household slaves, there were field slaves, there were slaves who worked in the salt mines. Women certainly didn't have any say in first century society. They had no rights. They didn't even have the opportunity to pick who they were going to marry. Sometimes even before they were born, they were promised away to someone. Children had no rights. In fact, most children weren't even named for many, many months until after they were born because nobody knew whether they would live or die. And even if they did live, they didn't know if parents would want to keep them. But of course, if you had things, right, if you had a bunch of power, or if you had a bunch of money, well, then it was obvious that God had favor on you, that you were special. And so it was just easy for you to get more and more power and more money and to accumulate more in life. But if you were not a part of that very elite group of people, you had little or no rights. And so when Jesus showed up on this planet, there was injustice everywhere. And so he made it his mission to constantly see in others what they did not see in themselves and to elevate the dignity of human beings. And we see this all throughout his teachings. In fact, when we put his teachings back to back to back, it is like drinking from a fire hydrant. All right? So we've got the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10. Jesus is telling this story. He says, there's this guy who is attacked and he's left for dead. Religious guy walks by, sees him there, does nothing about it. A prominent individual in the community walks by, does nothing about it. Like people that everybody would honor, they did nothing about it. But he says a Samaritan comes by and sees the condition this guy's in and does something about it. Now, Samaritans were not liked by the Jewish people, to put it lightly. They were outcasts because Samaritans were half Jewish, so they were called half-breeds. And in this story, Jesus makes the Samaritan the hero. He says the Samaritan had compassion, the Samaritan had grace, the Samaritan had mercy. He elevates the Samaritan and makes them the hero of the story. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus tells the story of 3 things that are lost. And in each story, those 3 things seem very, very insignificant. But Jesus used the story to help people know that those who were spiritually lost, those who were disconnected from God, that they were not being neglected by God, overlooked by God, that they had significant value, that God was not writing them off. He elevated those who were disconnected from God. In Matthew chapter 5, it's the most famous talk Jesus ever gave. He's looking at a group of poor people living in poverty, people who are struggling and have difficulty in their life. He's looking at some people who are going through persecution. And of course, in first century, everybody believes it's because we've done something to tick God off. He's cursed us for whatever reason. We're going through difficult times and man, we have made God mad. But Jesus is giving this talk and he's looking at the audience and he's seeing who the audience is filled with. And he says, blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who are being persecuted. Blessed are those who are going through difficult times. God has not abandoned you. God has not forgotten about you. You matter to God. And in doing so, he elevates the rejected and the outcast of society. In Luke chapter 21, we read about a widow giving an offering. It's at the temple, and she puts in less than $1 in today's money. And before her, lots of people had given significant sums of money. And Jesus sees this widow. Now, first century widow doesn't have any rights. Most people think that she's been cursed by God. That's why her husband's dead. And now she's giving just a little bit amount of money. And Jesus calls attention to her. And he says, I want you to know that this woman has actually given more than everybody else because she has very, very little. And out of her poverty, out of having nothing, she still gave something. And he elevates this widow. And he calls her generous and faithful. And so when you read through the teachings of Jesus, I mean, it's over and over and over. It's like drinking from a fire hydrant. It's absolutely unreal how many people he just elevated the dignity. He did it through his teachings, but he also did it through his interactions. I mean, it's overwhelming to try to keep up with the stories. In John chapter 4, Jesus and his disciples are traveling through a little town in Samaria. Samaria is where the Samaritans live. And of course, nobody likes Samaritans because they had cooties. They were half-breeds, right? And so they're traveling through and Jesus is tired. So he sits down by a well. His disciples go out to get some food. They come back from getting food and they see Jesus talking to a Samaritan. But it's not just any Samaritan. It's a Samaritan woman. And in doing so, Jesus elevates this woman. In Luke chapter 7, we read about a Roman military officer coming to Jesus and saying, Jesus, my servant is sick. Would you please extend mercy and heal him? Jews hated the Romans because the Romans were oppressing the Jews. But Jesus responds to the request and he heals the servant. And in doing so, he elevates the role of this servant. And at the same time, he elevates the role of this Roman military officer who was hated by the Jews. In Luke chapter 19, we read the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a tax collector, the scum of society. Even though tax collectors were Jewish, they worked for the Roman government. So when they would collect taxes, they would actually exaggerate how much you owed, and they would steal from you. So this was their brothers and sisters they were ripping off. So they were just the lowest of the low. And Jesus is going through the town of Jericho, and he notices Zacchaeus, a tax collector, and he says, hey, Zacchaeus, today I want to spend some time with you. I want to go to your house. I want to risk my reputation by crossing the threshold of your door. I'm going to elevate you. In Matthew chapter 9, Jesus is noticing a guy by the name of Matthew who's collecting taxes, again, the scum of society. And he says to Matthew, Matthew, I want you to leave your job. I want you to come and follow me and be one of my disciples. And so Matthew decided to follow him. And then later on, we read that Jesus was hanging with Matthew and his friends, who this is what the scriptures say. They had the reputation for being notorious B.I.G. sinners. So they were. And yet he elevated their role. In Matthew chapter 19, we read about parents bringing their children to Jesus to say, hey, Jesus, would you bless them? And of course, the disciples are like, no, get the children away from Jesus, because children are not valued. They don't have any big rights. They don't have a big voice. Jesus has time for important people. That's what the disciples say. But what does Jesus do? He says, let the children come to me. And in doing so, he elevates the value and the worth and the dignity of children. In Luke chapter 4, we read about many people who are sick, mentally sick, physically sick, coming to Jesus and asking for his attention, asking to be healed. Now again, why are they sick? Because apparently God has rejected them. He's cursed them. Something must be wrong. On one occasion, we read about a blind man who he's been blind since birth, and the crowds asked Jesus, well, who sinned, this guy or his parents? I mean, he's an outcast for a reason. Obviously, he's a sinner. That's how they thought in the first century Jewish society. But these sick people are coming to Jesus and he's interacting with them, and they don't understand much about germs, but they do know you could catch what someone else has. But it doesn't keep Jesus from touching people and from loving people and from hugging people and from serving people, constantly elevating those who are sick in their dignity. In Luke chapter 23, towards the end of his life, Jesus is having a conversation with a convict. And he promises the convict, even in these final moments of his life, that he's going to receive grace and mercy. He's elevating him. And so all throughout the teachings of Jesus, all throughout his interactions with people, Jesus is pausing. He's giving dignity to individuals living in very difficult, chaotic, and cruel times. He was able to see in people what they did not see in themselves. So one day, a Pharisee by the name of Simon invites Jesus to come have dinner with him. And so Jesus goes to this dinner party because he didn't discriminate against religious people even. And he's at this dinner party, and they're out in the front porch, and they're eating, and they're laughing, and they're talking. And this woman, who all we know about her from Scripture is she had a really bad reputation. She kind of pops out from around the corner, and she kind of kneels down to where Jesus is sitting. And before anybody can realize what's happening, she's washing his feet. She's cleaning his feet. She's using her hair to do it. She's got expensive perfume that she's cleaning up his feet with. And it's just like taking everybody by surprise. And the man who's hosting the party, this religious leader, this Pharisee named Simon, here's what he thought. When the Pharisee who had invited Jesus saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She's a sinner. The fact that Jesus would allow this woman to wash his feet with her hair and perfume makes it obvious that he must not know that she's a sinner. Because you don't interact with sinners, you don't talk to sinners, you don't let sinners get around you, because you might catch what they have. You might be corrupted in some way. You might somehow become less of a person. And here's what happens next. Simon, Jesus said to the Pharisee, I have something to say to you. Go ahead, teacher, Simon replied. And then Jesus launches into this story. And he tells the story of two individuals who owe a guy, the same guy, money. One owes just a little bit of money, the other owes a whole bunch of money. Neither could repay. And so the guy who was owed the money says, you know what, I'm gonna cancel the debt. Don't worry about it. And then Jesus looks to Simon, he says, all right, Simon, you tell me, who do you think was more grateful? Who do you think was more appreciative? And Simon's thinking, oh, this is probably a trick question. I don't know where you're going with this, but it seems to me like the person who was forgiven the larger debt. And Jesus says, bingo. And he says, the woman washing my feet, the one with the really bad reputation, she's been forgiven a whole lot. And so she's expressing her gratitude. But Simon was so stuck in his self-righteousness that he couldn't even show appreciation and gratitude for what God had done in his own life. And so everywhere he went, Jesus elevated the dignity and the value and the worth of individuals. Now I just got to tell you, and I feel like this is such a no-brainer, like this is self-evident. That is not what most people do. This is not natural for us. What's natural is to make fun of people who are different than us. That's natural. What's natural is to make people feel inferior so we can feel better about ourselves. What's natural is to say, I have the power and I have the influence, so I'm gonna discriminate. What's natural is to show a little bit of prejudice, a little bit of racism, a little bit of chauvinism. What's natural is to say, well, I don't like him and I don't like her and I don't think you should either. What's natural is to put down others and to elevate ourselves. It's natural to want to be the hero. And we will all do what is natural unless we slow down to open our eyes and to look for the value and the worth and the significance in other people. Because it's real easy to make a judgment call on someone when we don't really know them. So we make a judgment call on just some simple interaction, but it's amazing how many times in life when we think something of somebody and then as we get to know them, man, it just completely changes how we think about them. All right, it's like when you're driving. You're driving and the person in front of you is kind of veering into different lanes, right? Or they're hitting their brakes real suddenly. Or, you know, they're changing lanes and not using their blinker. That's really irritating, isn't it? I mean, they're just idiots. They need to be off the road. Somebody needs to take their license. That's how we think. But if they have a little sticker on their car that says student driver, it's interesting how much more patience we have with them. It's interesting how our whole attitude changes. All of a sudden, the quick braking and the swerving a little bit, maybe the changing lanes without using blinker, it all of a sudden makes a little bit more sense. I am convinced that all of us would be much more loving if people wore stickers on the outside describing what was happening on the inside. So if you want to be a hero maker, you have to slow down to see what is happening on the inside of others. And when you do that, doesn't matter who the person is, you will start to see value. You will start to see a little bit more potential and significance than you ever thought was there. When you slow down enough to get to know somebody, you're able to see in them what they do not see in themselves. Every one of us hold a set of keys in our hand. And it is our responsibility to find the key that unlocks the potential, that unlocks the talent, that unlocks the character of the person we're interacting with. You want to be a hero maker? Then we have to learn to value the diversity and the uniqueness of other people. That's what hero makers do. They don't just look for everybody like themselves, right? Hey, man, when I see somebody like myself, they have the same personality. I'm like, man, they're a winner, right? It's easy when someone's exactly like you. But man, hero makers learn to value the diversity and uniqueness of other people. And as we listen to people, as we truly hear their stories, as we do our best to pay attention to them, we start to appreciate what they bring into this world. Now, if you've been around here for a while, you know that I am a personality test junkie. All right, so our staff is constantly taking personality stuff and a test, and we're taking different assessments on temperament. And I mean, we've done them all, right? Myers-Briggs, DISC, Enneagram, the list goes on. And we do all this because I want our staff to know how to best interact with one another. And I want our staff to learn how to appreciate what the other people bring to the team. Because my temptation, and you've got your own temptations, my temptation is to say, you know what team members are the best? The ones with the most gregarious and outgoing personalities. Those are the ones that I just connect with the most. So the ones that are in the lobbies, high-fiving people, kissing babies, right? Hugging people, they're like the mayor of the town. Man, those are the ones that I'm like, dude, these are the greatest employees ever. And I just assume they're the best leaders. But what I've learned over time is that there are all different types of personalities and people with different temperaments that can be great leaders. Right? Regardless of what your personality is, unless it's creepy, right? You can add tremendous value to a team. And so right now, we're actually kind of going old school, and we're going through the different temperaments. These came out years ago: sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and melancholic. Right? Sanguines are the people who just, they love to have fun. They love to be around people. Do we have any sanguines in the room? Oh, I knew someone. They don't just want to clap, right? They don't want to raise their hand. They're going to yell out, whoa, we're going to have a good time, right? Cholerics, these are the people who are all about power and control. Oh, I love these people, right? I would fit into choleric. Phlegmatic, these are people calm and harmony. They just want to be peacemakers. Melancholics, they care about perfection and order. But we need all types of people. And by understanding people's temperaments, this is why I bring our staff through this stuff. It's much easier to see their value and to see what they bring to the team. Now, I see this in my own kids. So my daughter, Alyssa, she is a reflection of myself. She is choleric. She's power and control. It doesn't matter what the scenario is. She has to be in control. So a couple weeks ago, you can imagine how broken up she must have been. She texted me, and she told me about her van that she drives. It's actually my van, but had, you see right there a little bit in the bumper, she had been in she said the van had gotten banged up in a hit and run. Okay, so it's got this crack through it. And I know Alyssa, this is now a situation where she is not in control. And so I know her anxiety, and I know how this can go. And so I texted her back, and I just said, hey, listen, the van's drivable. You're not hurt. All right, let's just not worry about it. It doesn't look like a bunch of damage. She replied, okay, good, because by hit and run, I mean I drove it into a snowbank and then drove off. She had to make sure she was in control of the situation and in control of my response before she tells me the full story. Now, my daughter, Caitlin, is sanguine, okay? Most of the time, she's about people and fun. And I say most of the time because I think she's got multiple personality disorder. It feels like every couple months, like, who are you, girl, right? But most of the texts that she sends to me are just complete nonsense and fun. And last week, she sent me a text, and she was mocking me. She sent me a screenshot from a picture her friend sent her from the airport, and it said, literally, this guy has the exact same style as your dad. And I looked at that guy and I thought, that's a trendsetter, man. I love what that guy's wearing. Absolutely, right? But both daughters bring joy into our home, and they both add something. Listen, if you want to be the hero, you need to insist that everybody conforms to you and interacts with you in a style you're comfortable with. But if you want to be a hero maker, learn to appreciate and to value the uniqueness of other people. Understand that everybody has strengths. And start trying to see in others what they do not see in themselves. When you look at your child's teacher, do you only see their faults? Or do you see what they add to your child? When you look at your spouse, do you only see their annoying quirks? When you look at your children, do you only see the things that need to change? When you look at your employees or your employer, do you only see their character defects? If so, my encouragement to you is to pause and to pray and to ask God for wisdom and ask God to open your eyes. One of the disciples of Jesus, James, says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and with honor. And if we can learn to see the good in others, this is just going to become a normal part of who we are. It's just going to become a habit in our life. I don't know if you've ever stayed at the Ritz-Carlton, but obviously it's a hotel chain with a great reputation. They provide outstanding service to all of its customers. Well, the former CEO, Horst Schultz, says that their outstanding service is rooted in a motto that they try to build and drill into every single one of their employees, and that's this: we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. They want to drill into their thinking that, hey, we are people of honor, serving people of honor. If you want to be a hero maker, you need to adopt a similar model for your life. Something along the lines of, we are people of value, serving people of value. We are people of potential, serving people of potential. We are people of honor, serving people of honor. We are people of significance, serving people of significance. We are people of dignity, serving people of dignity. So when you leave here today, who do you need to honor? Who do you need to restore dignity to? Who is that person that you're saying, man, in this season of my life, I'm working to be a hero maker in their life? That is what Jesus did. He elevated others. He put the spotlight on others. He saw in others what they were unable to see in themselves. And in doing so, he became a hero maker. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, open our eyes to the good in others. Open our eyes to the value in others. Open our eyes to the potential in others. Open our eyes to how you've wired people and to see their strengths and to see what they add to this life. God, give us the ability to see these things, to see in others what they are unable to see in themselves. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.